The Viridian, a ship once used to ferry sacred elven artifacts, now served a far more urgent purpose, delivering an ultimatum to a species that understood only cruelty. Aeliana, High Warden of the rediscovered Elven line, had witnessed the slow, agonizing destruction of civilizations. But nothing had ignited the cold fire of her resolve like the reports from the newly settled human colony on Xylo 7, the K'tharr Hegemon. A brutal insectoid empire had committed an unforgivable act. They had targeted the most defenseless. She knew, with chilling certainty, that striking at the young was the quickest way to break the spirit of a species. But the K'tharr had profoundly misunderstood the spirit of the humans. The bridge of the Viridian was bathed in the cool, sterile light of the human-made tactical displays. After their narrow escape from the K'tharr, a story now whispered in the star lanes, Aeliana and her two surviving dragons, Ignis and Silas, had spent cycles strengthening their alliance with the nascent human confederacy. The humans had offered no empty promises of ancient magic. Instead, they had offered pragmatism, steel, and a terrifying, unified rage. Aeliana stood at the helm, the weight of 1,000 years of elven wisdom balanced against the immediate, volatile anger she now carried for her allies. Ignis, the Sunstone Dragon, rested his enormous head on the console beside her, his molten gold eyes tracking the jump calculations. Silas, the stealthy midnight drake, was a nearly invisible shadow draped across her shoulders, absorbing the ambient heat. "Status report, K'tharr," Aeliana commanded, addressing the human strategy officer stationed beside her. K'tharr, a young, focused woman with a scar running across her eyebrow, a souvenir from a previous border skirmish, nodded curtly. "Warden, we are 30 minutes from the Xylo 7 orbit. The K'tharr defensive perimeter is minimal. They thought this was a soft target. Their primary force is focused on extracting the prisoners from the main settlement. Designated Ember Rise. We have confirmation, 27 human children, aged 5 to 12, are aboard the lead K'tharr siege vessel. The Hive Mother." Kara's voice was tight, betraying the controlled fury shared by every human on the ship. Aeliana placed a hand on the dragon Ignis's head, calming the low growl rumbling in his chest. "And the ultimatum?" "It was sent 1 standard hour ago," Kara confirmed, pulling up the message on the main screen. It was a single stark human line. "You hurt human children, and you will learn what comes next." There were no threats of military action, no demands for ransom, only a prophecy of inevitable, precise consequences. The K'tharr, who relied on complex, multi-layered diplomacy and grand displays of power, had dismissed the message as a bizarre, emotional outburst. "The K'tharr will view that as a declaration of weakness," Aeliana stated, her expression grim. "Precisely," Kara agreed, a chillingly calm smile touching her lips. "They think humans only retaliate when they lose adults or ships. They have no concept of the sacred, uncompromising fury evoked by the threat to our young. They will realize their mistake when the first torpedo hits." Human strategy, Warden, is not always logical. It is often purely emotional. The Viridian dropped out of warp space, instantly swallowed by the cold, dark silence of the Xylo 7 system. Ahead, the shimmering emerald green planet was haloed by the angular, ugly silhouettes of the K'tharr siege fleet. The lead vessel, the Hive Mother, a monstrous, chitinous structure, was hovering over the largest settlement. "All ships. This is the Viridian." Alina's voice cut through the comms channels, her accent a blend of elven antiquity and human sharpness. "Initiate the Shepherd Protocol now. Focus solely on disabling, not destroying, the Hive Mother's primary engines. The children must be protected. The human Confederate fleet is strange. Cobbled together collection of salvaged starships, fast frigates, and heavily armed transport vessels moved with immediate, surgical precision. They didn't engage the defense line. Instead, They flew straight past the smaller K'tharr destroyers and focused their entire firepower on the command ship. It was a highly risky, all-or-nothing maneuver that bypassed all traditional naval warfare doctrine. Aeliana directed the Viridian into a tight, defensive arc. Ignis and Silas detached, rocketing toward the Hive Mother's dorsal surface. Aeliana had equipped them with specialized human-designed magnetic plating and a miniature comms pack. The dragons were not weapons. They were highly mobile, hyper-focused rescue agents. Ignis reports multiple energy signatures from the aft section. Prisoner hold located. The Sunstone Dragon's urgent projection flooded Alina's mind. Just as the human frigates began hammering the Hive Mother's engine block, the K'tharr realized the danger. They scrambled their interceptors. A dozen needle-thin, black craft sliced through the void toward the human ships, firing plasma rounds. The Viridian's shields flared violently as it took a direct hit intended for a nearby human transport. Shields at 70%. They're focusing fire on the command vessel. K'tharr shouted, her fingers flying across the sensor array. They won't get through, Aeliana declared, gripping the helm controls. She needed to buy Ignis and Silas time to breach the outer hull. Suddenly, a new, massive signature bloomed on the tactical screen, not K'tharr, but something older, larger, and terrifyingly fast. It was a K'tharr reinforcement fleet that had used a hidden slipstream to arrive early. A huge, terrifyingly armored battleship, the K'tharr Dominator, materialized, flanked by 3 heavy destroyers. Warden, we have a catastrophic development. The Dominator is here. Its primary weapon is charging. It's aiming for the Viridian. Kara's voice was laced with genuine panic. Aeliana stared at the screen. The Dominator was a ship designed to vaporize entire colonial fleets. The Viridian, even with its reinforced shields, would be dust in seconds. They had gambled everything on a quick extraction, and the K'tharr had called their bluff. Aeliana knew they had only one desperate option left to draw the fire away, a risk that meant she would have to leave the relative safety of the bridge. "Kara, hold our position," Aeliana shouted, racing toward the armory. "Prepare the emergency eject sequence for Ignis and Silas once the hull is breached. I am going out there. I will deliver the ultimatum myself." Aeliana emerged onto the landing bay, locking her helmet into place. She strapped a specialized, ancient elven energy focus, a relic capable of channeling massive bursts of localized power, onto her forearm. She was one small elven woman, 2 tiny dragons, and a ship full of furious humans facing a battleship designed to conquer systems. As the Dominator finished charging its main cannon, Aeliana looked out into the void, knowing that the Viridian would not survive the next 20 seconds unless she made herself the target. She took one final breath, opened the airlock, and stepped out into the blackness, utterly alone, to face the wrath of the Hegemon's fleet. Aeliana drifted in the blackness, utterly exposed against the vast, empty gulf between the human fleet and the monstrous K'tharr Dominator. The elven energy focus strapped to her forearm felt cold and heavy. This antique relic, once used in silent, meditative ceremonies, was about to be weaponized in a way its creators never intended, as a blinding, desperate distraction. She used her specialized suit thrusters to propel herself toward the Dominator's massive bow. A tiny speck aiming for a mountain of chitin and steel. On the bridge of the Viridian, Kara watched the impossible scene unfold on the external view screen. She's going right for the main gun." Her voice was a strained whisper. "She is drawing their focus," the human captain of the Viridian, Aeliana, stated grimly. "The Hegemon values the capture of unique specimens like her more than any single starship. They won't vaporize their prize." Aeliana knew this truth. The K'tharr would want to paralyze her, not obliterate her. She only needed a second of concentrated focus. As the Dominator's primary cannon finished charging, a horrifying spectacle of crackling energy, Aeliana triggered the elven relic. It wasn't a destructive weapon. It was a pure, unfocused surge of magical power, channeled through ancient crystals. The blast erupted from her arm in a brilliant, silent nova of white gold light. It struck the Dominator's optical sensors and the primary cannon array with the force of a localized solar flare. The effect was instantaneous and chaotic. The charging cannon, overloaded by the sudden surge of energy, discharged prematurely in a harmless scattering field of energy. The K'tharr ship, temporarily blinded and confused, hesitated. "Now, K'tharr. Fire everything." Aeliana roared. The human fleet, seizing the critical second Aeliana had bought them, unleashed a devastating volley of specialized torpedoes. They ignored the shields and targeted the secondary sensor arrays and communication systems of the Dominator. The battleship, still reeling from the blinding flash, couldn't coordinate its defense. Meanwhile, aboard the primary K'tharr vessel, the Hive Mother, the diversion allowed the dragons their critical window. Ignis, the Sunstone Dragon, used his magnetic plating to cling to the hull, melting through a secondary access hatch with his concentrated fire. Silas, the Midnight Drake, slipped through the breach like a shadow, disappearing into the maze of the alien vessel. Prisoner hold breached. Children secure. Proceeding to extraction point, Silas's mental echo was calm and cold in Aelina's mind. A lifeline of success amid the chaos. The K'tharr, realizing they had been fooled, shifted their focus back to the small, fragile elven woman. A barrage of capture nets and paralysis beams streaked toward Aeliana. She dodged, her suit thrusters burning furiously, but one net snared her left leg. She was instantly immobilized, hanging helpless in the void, being reeled toward the dark maw of the Dominator's boarding bay. On the Viridian, panic erupted. "They got her! Aeliana, we have to pull her out." "We can't. Not with that ship's gravity well." Aeliana snapped, maintaining tactical discipline. "K'tharr, are Ignis and Silas clear of the Hive Mother?" "Clear. They're heading back to the rendezvous point with all 27 children secured." K'tharr confirmed, tears of relief and anguish mixing in her eyes. "But we're losing Aeliana." "The primary objective is complete," Aeliana said, her voice heavy with tactical necessity. "Now we hold true to the ultimatum." Aeliana, being dragged rapidly toward the K'tharr Bay, watched the human fleet execute the second phase of their plan. The Viridian and its sister ships did not retreat. Instead, they surrounded the crippled Dominator. They didn't fire another shot at the main engines. Instead, they initiated a localized, low-frequency EMP burst. Delivered through dozens of precisely positioned mines, the electromagnetic pulse didn't damage the ships, but it delivered a catastrophic, crippling blow to the K'tharr Hegemon's entire communications network in the sector. Aeliana was dragged into the humid, sickly air of the Dominator's hangar bay. She was surrounded by massive insectoid warriors, their chitinous bodies clicking with anticipation. They were huge, easily twice her size, armed with thermal lances. "The Elven prize is secured," the K'tharr commander hissed, his compound eyes fixed on her. "Prepare her for immediate interrogation. The humans' absurd message ends here. They will learn that their emotional weakness." Aeliana, though paralyzed, met the commander's gaze. "You misunderstand, Hegemon," she interrupted, her voice transmitted clearly through her helmet speakers. "The weakness you perceive is our greatest strength. The ultimatum was not a threat of what we would do to you here. It was a promise of what humanity would unleash elsewhere." Just as the commander signaled for her capture, 1,000 comm screens on the Dominator flared to life. They were all displaying the same simple, devastating message. A single human face, projected onto every available K'tharr frequency across dozens of star systems. The human, a stern-faced woman named Natalie, spoke without emotion. "You targeted our children. Your ultimatum is now void. You will pay the clan's wrath." Then, the screens switched to live feeds, not of battleships, but of coordinated. Surgical strikes across the K'tharr economic and resource network, their orbital mining arrays, their agricultural processing plants, their unarmed, non-military logistical hubs. The humans hadn't sent a single battleship in revenge. They had unleashed 1,000 surgical cuts. They weren't engaging in total war, but total economic and infrastructural collapse. It was a punishment aimed not at military pride, but at the very stability of the Hegemon's complex society. The K'tharr commander stared in horror as the feeds showed his empire crumbling under the relentless, chaotic and decentralized assault of human efficiency. The sheer scale and coordination of the attack, all launched while their fleet was distracted by a single elven woman, was incomprehensible. Aeliana watched the commander's confusion give way to pure, alien terror. He had missed the point entirely. The humans would not fight their war. They would simply take away the enemy's ability to live. The clan's wrath was not a fleet, it was an entire furious species acting as one single, vengeful organism. "You underestimated us," Aeliana whispered as the stunned commander turned, realizing the trap was sprung. "You only saw the ships. You never saw the will." A deafening alarm blared across the hangar bay, overriding the comms. "Warden, this is K'tharr. We're coming back for you." "Hold on." Aeliana looked up. The bay doors were ripping open, not from an external attack, but from something incredibly fast and terrifyingly hot moving through the void. A colossal, shimmering burst of fire roared toward the open hangar. It was Ignis, the Sunstone Dragon, carrying an empty extraction pod, hurtling toward her with suicidal speed. But he was not alone. Right beside him, maneuvering with impossible agility, was a heavily modified human dropship. Its landing gears were replaced with reinforced grappling claws, and written crudely on its hull, Aeliana could just make out the words, "The Babysitter." The ship was heading directly into the hangar, ignoring the hundreds of K'tharr lances now focusing fire. A desperate extraction was underway, but could the human ship survive being crushed, or the fire from the dragon as it burst through the Dominator's massive energy field? The airlock of the K'tharr hangar bay was a maelstrom of destruction. Aeliana, still struggling against the paralyzing net, watched in horrified admiration as Ignis, radiating heat and pure defiance, hammered the already compromised bay door. Right behind him, the small human dropship, piloted by a woman named Natalie, the same face that had delivered the devastating Ultimatum slammed through the outer hull. The sheer force of the entrance pulverized the K'tharr. Guards standing near the breach, the human pilot was a whirlwind of controlled, furious action. Natalie didn't bother with small arms. She simply opened the rear ramp of the dropship, revealing a heavy, automated turret that immediately began spitting streams of heavy-caliber tungsten rounds. The K'tharr warriors, designed to fight organized military units, were utterly unprepared for this close-quarters, chaotic savagery. "Warden, move!" Natalie's voice crackled over the emergency comms frequency. Metallic and utterly devoid of fear, Aeliana strained, focusing her remaining magical energy on the thin filaments of the capture net. She felt the paracordage snap, just as a K'tharr thermal lance sliced through the air, where her head had been moments before. Free, she scrambled toward the dropship's open ramp. Ignis providing cover fire, a living shield of molten rock and flame. The true moment of terror arrived not from the K'tharr, but from the sudden powerful whine of the Dominator's primary systems failing. The ship began to list violently, dragged down by the damage inflicted by the human fleet's initial ambush and the subsequent structural damage from the rescue. "Natalie, this ship is breaking up," Aeliana shouted, leaping into the relative safety of the dropship's pressurized bay. "We know," Natalie yelled back, her hands flying across the controls, attempting to maneuver the dropship away from the collapsing hangar. This was always part of the plan. They messed with the clan's wrath. They lose the battleship. Just as Natalie initiated the final thrust for escape, a dark shadow erupted from the hangar's upper scaffolding. Silas, the Midnight Drake. He wasn't retreating. He was attacking. The small dragon, having completed his mission of confirming the children's safety, was now performing a final critical act of vengeance. He latched onto the exposed cooling manifold of the Dominator's main reactor, injecting a concentrated, acidic venom. The liquid reacted instantly with the K'tharr coolant, causing the catastrophic localized meltdown. The Dominator didn't explode in a spectacular flash. Instead, it imploded, collapsing inward on itself as its structural integrity failed completely. The shockwave of the rapid gravitational collapse slammed into the human dropship. "Hold on!" Natalie screamed, fighting the controls. Aeliana gripped the frame of the dropship, watching the vacuum suck the remains of the Hegemon vessel into a tiny, dying star of light. When the turbulence subsided, they were alone again in the silence of space, heading back toward the waiting human fleet. They docked seamlessly with the Viridian. The atmosphere on the bridge was electric, a mix of victory and exhausted relief. Aeliana found K'tharr and Elena surrounded by the returning children, now safe and crying, clutching makeshift toys and blankets. The sight was startlingly mundane and profoundly moving. There were no grand ceremonies, no boasting, just the silent, deep satisfaction of a promise fulfilled. "The children are secured, Warden," Elena reported, her eyes glistening. "The ultimatum has been delivered. The K'tharr Hegemon's entire regional network is crippled, and they know the price of touching our young." Aeliana, leaning heavily on a railing, her armor scratched and smoking, nodded slowly. She looked at Natalie, who stood near the helm, wiping blood and oil from her helmet. "You risked everything, pilot," Aeliana said, her voice filled with respect. "You didn't hesitate to sacrifice the ship yourself, or even my dragons, to save the children and deliver this message." Natalie shrugged, her gaze practical and unflinching. "It's the human way, Warden. We'll squabble over borders and resources until the end of time, but the moment you touch a human child, the rules change. We don't send fleets. We send consequences. Every last one of us, working in the shadows. Fighting without glory, acting as one clan. The Hegemon will never recover from the lesson you helped us teach them." Ignis nudged Elena's hand, a comforting warmth radiating from his scales. Silas settled around her shoulders, his presence a silent vow of loyalty. Aeliana finally understood the enduring power of humanity. It wasn't their technological might or their chaotic spirit. It was the ferocious, simple, and unified love for their most vulnerable. It was an unwavering shield, forged by every single member of the species. Aeliana, the last High Warden of a dying elven line, smiled for the first time in centuries. Her search for an alliance was over. She had found it in the fierce, stubborn hearts of the human clan, forever bound by an ultimatum that would echo through the stars. Subscribe now for more HFY stories of alliance and retribution. May the clan's wrath always guide the stars.